Hi, beautiful souls. Welcome back to this channel. It's Tan here today, and I'm here with Sarah Elizabeth Darville. And welcome to the first episode of That Taboo Lifestyle. So, Sarah is an astrologer on the Tan Astrology Team, and she also has a website called Delightfully Taboo. And I'll provide a link to that in the description box below so you can check out some of her content there. And so because, Sarah is really into all things taboo, we thought it would be really interesting to create a series together on this channel talking about, well, something taboo. And we're starting off by looking at the planet Saturn. The Saturn is that planet that is a little bit considered like people don't really want to talk about Saturn. It does represent some amount of darkness. So we thought we'd start with that and looking at the Saturn return and kind of exposing the Saturn return so people can get a sense of what actually happens there and really talk about that and be open about that. And to help you guys out there as well, if you are going through your Saturn return or make sense of your past Saturn returns or future Saturn returns. But Sarah, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit to the audience in terms of your astrology placements and human design placements, maybe?
Oh, yeah, sure. Thanks, Han. So, I am an Aries sun, I am an Aquarius moon, and a Gemini rising, and a 6-2 generator, emotional generator. So, that's my human design and astrology.
Thank you, Sarah. So we thought we'd begin this video by talking a little bit about Saturn and what is our understanding of Saturn. So what would you say for you, Sarah, is your interpretation of this planet?
So, when I think about Saturn, I think about cold, old, and antique. That's what I always
Mm.
say in readings with Adriana. And I really like how she has this quote. I don't know where she got it from, but Saturn delays but never denies. So so yeah, I'm very Saturnian myself. We were talking before that I have a lot of Saturn ruled placements. So yeah, it's really cold, stern, discipline. It really wants you to perform, and the reward is what you produce from trying hard. So those are some of the things, and then of course boundaries and more that we'll get into, constriction, restriction. There's a lot of keywords that go with Saturn. So excited to dig
Yeah,
in.
yeah. And the way I like to look at Saturn, of course, it's the same as you, Sarah. And to add to that, I feel that Saturn is the teacher or the father principal within all of us in a sense of what did our father like this can be the male, authority figures in our life or somebody who just played that father role. Like, what was their belief that what did they consider important in life? What builds the foundation of a lot of the behaviors that they do? What's their sense of morality? That's another way that I like to look at Saturn. And because of this representation, I do feel that Saturn is associated with our shoulds or the things that we felt we should do, especially before our first Saturn return. And then just kind of reevaluating how much of those shoulds align with us and how much if it doesn't align with us. Is there
Totally,
anything
like
else
how
you
much of
wanna
it
yeah.
is, yeah, like instilled in us, how much of that is kind of conditioning as opposed to what truly brings us to life, what we're truly here to experience, or what we really want to move into as far as philosophy and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Like think about the rings of Saturn and how it just encloses around you and you have to navigate like how much do you want to step out of those rings and which part of it do you still want to keep and um so on and so forth. Yeah.
Yeah, imagery of Saturn. In fact, I'm taking courses, ancient astrology for the modern mystic with Achyuta Das. And so there's a lot of imagery in Saturn too. It's that boundary of the abyss. So when the ancients, were observing Saturn, it was the final planet that they could see. So anything beyond Saturn was kind of, the abyss. So that's really cool.
Right.
I've actually referenced the astrology podcast, episode 64, where they were talking about some of the imagery of Saturn too, and how it's kind of hazy and mystic. And so, this actually, the imagery of Saturn itself can also cause it to be seen as a malefic planet, which we know it, like we were saying, it's kind of got a bad rap, Saturn. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
I like the imagery that you put in here, and that's why maybe Saturn is like sometimes a dark planet, because in those days it would be just, where you could almost not see it. It would, in a sense, almost be like Pluto nowadays, where you can sort of sometimes see Pluto, sometimes not see it's in the dark. I think in those days it would probably be Saturn in many ways.
Yeah, and you think about, I mean, even now when you see Venus and Jupiter, they're super bright
Mm,
and vibrant and they look like really benefic planets. And so it's interesting how even that can, affect the stories and the mythology.
right. Yeah, do you wanna talk a little bit about the mythology? So you were bringing
Yeah.
that up earlier.
So it gets hairy because, you know, astrology is archetypally true. And so oftentimes oral tradition was the way that the stories were passed on. So it's kind of like a game of telephone, everything gets mixed up. And of course, when they were naming the planets, Uranus was left over. It was kind of one of the names of the Roman gods they could use. But Uranus is actually the father sky. So that was in mythology, I think it was Mesopotamian, and I don't know that they used these words, but Uranus is or Latin. And so that's father sky, and Gaia is mother earth.
Mhm.
So Uranus comes from Mother Earth. Actually, she birthed him on her own. And so Uranus is kind of the natural order of things. But Uranus doesn't want any of his children born. So he forces Gaia to keep them within her. And so Gaia constructs a plan with her son Cronus, which is Saturn. And not to be confused with Father Time, Kronos, but Cronus and also called Saturn castrates his father. From this, we get Aphrodite, three other races of people. And so Saturn is now the ruler, Kronos. And and that's actually where we get the original glyph of Saturn, which was a K before it was what we know it to be, the cross with kind of like a curl at the end. So Saturn, castrates his father. And then during his reign, it's called the Golden Age. So everybody likes it when Saturn's in charge, except Rhea, who is his sister and wife. And Rhea actually is having children as well, but also keeping them within her. It's really interesting how this mythology works. But anyway, so Rhea has a plot with her son Zeus or Jupiter, and Jupiter kills his father, Saturn. So there's this omen, you could say, that's repeated where the son will kill the father. So that's an interesting look at the mythology and, kind of where the names come from and could potentially be the reason for Uranus and Saturn co-ruling Aquarius. Or,
Mm.
yeah, so they're both in the same myth, but it doesn't really tell us too much about how that applies to our lives. But it was kind of a way that people kept up with the stories was through telling them and
Yeah.
relating them to things in nature.
It's so kind of interesting, this idea of killing off the father or
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
kind of like changing. I mean, we know Uranus, which is traditionally Saturn ruled, I should mention. So like in the ancient times, Aquarius was ruled by Saturn, and
Yeah.
also Capricorn was as well. Um, so it's kind of doing away with the order of things or the traditional way. So in that way,
Right.
this is still
Right.
similar to the
Right.
story that we know.
Right. Interesting. In this case, then you would say it's like Saturn that's actually killing off the old, or instead of Uranus being the one to do that. Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Interesting.
But still, that same kind of theme is running through it, so we can at least attach to that.
Yeah, but I do think Saturn is, though. Saturn is a a tool for you to figure out what's old within you, what's too traditional within you, what can you cut out? And a lot of people don't really look at Saturn like that, but Saturn is the key to breaking some of your limiting patterns and a lot of your behaviors. So,
Absolutely, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Right. So shall we get into like the Saturn return? And you made a slide about what like when do we get our Saturn returns and a little bit of information on that. So maybe I can share that with the audience and we can talk a little bit about what is the Saturn return.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think people are aware of the first Saturn return, but don't realize it's going to come back around.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah, pardon me. So, we all know about this Saturn return from age 27 to 31. It's kind of when Saturn gets back into the sign that was in when you were born. And so, as it says here, it's an initiation into adulthood and a time for you to define yourself again for yourself and not those kind of traditional conditioning or patterns that you've been raised with.
Mm. Mm.
And so this kind of correlates with, interestingly enough, things like what's called the 27 Club, which was a few artists, Jimi Hendrix being one of them, Janis Joplin dying, usually by their own accord, at their own, hand. And it would be because I always think of it as, where are you going to go from there when you've achieved that level of success? There's that question of course, not having the discipline, you could say, in that particular situation. So I won't go, too deep into it, but it's interesting how that 27 Club kind of correlates with this era of time. But it's going to be a time where you start to, really move into whatever it is that's maturing. And that means being
Yeah.
self-sufficient. That means doing things on your own and not relying on external validation.
Yeah. I love that you
Then
put the word adulthood here because um this is when you are actually maturing, not when you're 20 years old, not when you're 18, where when you watch a lot of like movies and in the mainstream media, it's like, yeah, 18 is when you have to be an adult, you have to grow up. But that's not really how humans beings work, like in their DNA, in their bodies, and it's just not that fast. And I like the fact that adulthood here is associated with doing something for yourself, not in the traditional way that maybe in the could say like in the past, being an adult means being responsible for other people or doing what you are supposed to be doing for society. But here it's like this idea of adulthood meaning doing something for yourself.
yeah, and I should mention too, I have the reference for these little blurbs. So I didn't actually write these, but I do have the astrologer that did. So
Mm,
we can put that in the notes too.
right.
Um, yeah, it's about your own personal journey. And there's a lot of different things, responsibility and what you should do, where you should be in life at 27. And in the States, it's you should have a 401k and a home with two children, and you should be married, and it's just not always like that. And so
No.
this is a wonderful time for those of us, especially like me, who aren't at that point in life to say, okay, like those kinds of things are just constructed by society and what it is to kind of feed the machine of
Yeah.
having a
Constructed
job.
by the Matrix.
Yes, that matrix lifestyle, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, then you get your second Saturn return around 56 to 60. And then if you're lucky, you even have a third one, which is to kind of well, yeah, you mentioned here moving into that mentorship role. And I also feel it is also time to even just it's almost like another chance. Well, you get various different chances the way I look at it when you have your Saturn square, Saturn oppositions. These are like Saturn's being lenient in some ways of like saying, "Hey, you didn't fulfill or you didn't quite, mature in the way that I had wanted you to, in your first Saturn return. So maybe in the Saturn square, Saturn opposition, and the next Saturn return, there's a chance for you, an opportunity for you to reevaluate, to reassess, and to redo some of the things that maybe you didn't quite accomplish or do in those times.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking to a 6 too, so we'll get into the human design later and how this kind of correlates with that same timeline of anybody that has a 6 line.
Hmm.
But when you get to your second Saturn return, this is somewhat of retirement age. What am I going to do for the rest of my life? What things didn't I get to accomplish? And,
Mm,
what dreams do I need to let go of and what dreams can I still fulfill? And then, like you were saying, if we're lucky, we get to that last Saturn return where, okay, this is when I'm going to enter a different realm completely. what didn't I get to do in this whole lifetime? What did I accomplish? Look back at the stories, and that's what makes it all really beautiful.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The story of your life.
Yeah.
Yeah, so let's get into the Saturn return stories that we wanted to talk about. But before we could do that, we have to let the audience know what is our Saturn sign and placements and even the gene keys of that. So my Saturn is in Capricorn. So we are a different Saturn generation. And I thought that would be quite interesting to have two Saturn return stories being told and to see how they, this is the variations there. But my Saturn's in Capricorn in the eighth house in Gene Key and Human Design Gate 38.
Yeah, my Saturn is in Aquarius, and it is in the gene key 41. And it's also, so Aquarius in my ninth house
Mm-hmm.
for the astrology.
Yeah, we both have Gemini risings. So,
That makes this even cooler because Tan and I have both Saturn ruled Saturn returns. So,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, super interesting to see how that is the same and how that might be different. But yeah, what would you say are the we can say the shoulds of Saturn Aquarius, and if you want to, in the ninth house, and how would you interpret just generically like this Saturn sign and house and gene key?
well, so with the Saturn and Aquarius, there does seem to be, for me, some kind of emphasis on one, technology, and two, my communities and my kind of groups, in that humanitarian way of Aquarius. So I thought that was interesting because I've now gone through several iterations of trying to experiment with different religions. And I thought, foreign travel might be the thing because this is ninth house. But I do seem to be heavily focused on technology being a way that I interact with friends and communities that I'm a part of. So that's been pretty huge. And interestingly enough, with Gene Key 41, the way that kind of seems to work out is, well, the shadow of Gene Key 41, oh my
Should I show
gosh.
that? Maybe I can show the slides.
Yeah, maybe.
Can you see
Okay,
it?
so yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I can see 41. So the shadow there being fantasy. So the way that I like to correlate this with Aquarius, I thought of this morning, is basically like the fantasy part of this gene key, the shadow, is the water bearers holding the water jug and looking into it at all the possibilities. So the water is kind of like this fantasy land, and I'm just staring at it, and I've got all these ideas, all these plans, all the ways to get there. I just need to do this, 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 and this. I need to take this class at this time during, and so I had
Mm,
my whole life planned. I just knew every little thing. I wanted to help other people figure out how to get through school, what classes, prerequisites they needed. This was something I was really interested in.
mm,
And I thought that my kind of communities would come out of that I would meet a lot of people in my biology courses and things like that. And I'd have a lot of friends in the scientific community. So this was kind of where I was coming from. And so, yeah, fantasizing about my future and what all that could entail if I got a degree, if I just did this, and if this just happened. Well, that fantasy, you're putting a lot of energy, first of all, into just the fantasy, into just, building that. So the anticipation from this gene key for me feels like knowing that there's this through line, knowing how life works. Because I got a biology degree. I know that we're born and we die, and that there's something in between that, and that's a story.
mm,
So rather than trying to construct the story before I'm living through it, I can anticipate that there's something coming to me. There's the plot's continuing to move forward, whether or not I'm the one that's causing it. I'm not. That's the cool thing.
wow.
So with emanation, so now we've taken that fantasy in the water bearer's bucket. I've been staring at it, and you move through anticipation and start kind of spilling the water out in different places and things grow. So with from anticipation of, knowing that there's a plot, knowing that I continue to carry the plot, and it's a pot, a plot pot. And so if I just, pour water out, then, things start to happen. I just put myself into situations and things start to happen. The plot moves along. With emanation, I wasn't too, like, it didn't click for me really well what that meant. And so, because I kept thinking emanating light, and
Mm,
instead, emanation actually means to flow from. So it's so interesting because that's the, Aquarius is the water bearer. So it's actually just getting into that flow state, allowing life to just happen. And, flow state is a little different than just kind of being lazy and letting things happen. It's you lose time. You don't even realize how much time has gone by when
mm,
you're doing something that you love creating. So, yeah.
right. Yeah, I like that you did bring in this imagery of Aquarius holding the jug and pouring that water onto the world, because I think this gene key is also linked to a connection with the morphogenetic field and being able to feel into that. And I think that when you said that, I was like, oh, that makes so much sense, because you're literally like holding the the field, this energy field that we're all living in. And so of course you would be able to maybe tap into that at some point. Um, so yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah.
So yeah.
This gene key is also too, just to put another add on to that, it's the start codon. It's associated with the start codon. So that would be kind of this codon that needs to be read in order for whatever enzyme needs to read the rest of the DNA
Mhm.
strand. It will start with this codon that it's
Right.
associated with.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to ask you a little bit about like Saturn in Aquarius and in the ninth house. Would you say that you were maybe had some kind of focus on the scientific side of Aquarius at the first part of like the first maybe 30 years or first 25 years of your life, however that was for you, that you were focused on the scientific side, that maybe you neglected the other side of Aquarius, which is the eccentric, the the unconventional, the yeah, just the unseen side of it.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I was put into gifted programs as a kid. So from the very beginning, I was just in the books, whatever's written in the textbook, that's the truth. And so, yeah, I would say I definitely, I was kind of like given friends too in that way, where it wasn't people that I chose. It was just people that were put upon me to be friends with. So yeah, I wasn't leaning into those emotional relationships with people. It was very knowledge based, kind
Oh.
of logical friendships even.
Mm. And what would you say is your father principle or the teachings of your father based on this Saturn placement?
It's interesting because my dad is really involved with a community of people. So
Mhm.
the what we do is taxidermy. But he's always had communities of people that he's associated with. And some of the things that I've learned just by working with him and training people and developing community in that way, kind of like what you do interesting with astrology. You got an interest and you're so knowledgeable about it that you're able to create a community of people that are just interested in you digesting the information for them.
Mhm.
So it's similar
Right.
in that way.
Yeah, right.
The lessons though, I mean, of course, patience, time, this things take longer when you want something and you've got that, fantasy about it. There's a lot of time and space in between you and the thing, and to include things like temper. So put space between you and the things that agitate you, because the agitation is part of this gene key too. So, just putting space in between the things that really set you off can create power. You have so much power when you can reflect and realize you didn't, lose your cool. You kept that
Mm.
power contained.
Yeah, and what would you say with this gene key? Because I feel there's a bit of a dreamer energy with this one, a bit of like, making your wildest dreams come true in a sense. Would you say that that's something that your father has some of those traits and he taught you that, or was he restricting you from that, or how would you interpret it?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head, and because you kind of have an idea of some of the things he's doing now, but when I was a kid, yeah, I wanted to travel the world, and so my dad, not for me, but just out of his own dreams, got it work overseas and then moved us overseas. And so I got to explore Turkey and Kuwait and Bahrain. And so, just kind of experienced a whole different philosophical worldview.
Mm,
Because yeah, he had those dreams to just get out and do something bigger. So
mm,
totally.
for sure, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and with Saturn in your ninth house, I mean, traditionally you would look at that as Saturn blocking you from travels and higher education. But that didn't seem like to be the case with you.
Only during my Saturn return has it been. Very much so. In fact, I was last year supposed to go to something called Greening the Desert in Jordan. And it's this project, a beautiful project, by the way, if anybody else wanted to do it. But they're doing permaculture practices in the
Hmm.
desert and actually growing a food forest.
Hmm.
And so I wanted to do that, but with the restrictions on testing and that kind of thing to get back in the States, it just seemed too far fetched. And I also, there's a couple of mentions in the timeline I did where I had started a master's program or was getting enrolled in it. And just all of a sudden, the professor basically stops talking with me. And
Okay.
there
Right.
was another recent school that I applied to, which I really didn't have any chance of getting in, but I had those like big dreams. And so, yeah, there's been a couple of things like that where I didn't get into programs that I was hoping to get into.
Right. Yeah, maybe we'll talk a little bit about more later when we actually touch on your
Yeah.
Saturn returns and like what are the lessons and things like that that you've learned.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally see you embodying the 41, the Saturn in Aquarius at ninth house now that I hear a little bit more about your story. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, so I'll just go into Saturn in Capricorn and in Jinki 38 and what that would be like, and Saturn being in the eighth house as well. Um, yeah, before we go on to the Saturn return stories. So that we can share the screen. So Saturn in the eighth house, like how would you like traditionally what are your impressions of that, Sarah?
Initially, with eighth house, I think of like your value as far as other people are concerned. So anything to do with like inheritance, debts, taxes, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah, I would definitely look at that Saturn as bringing some kind of maybe dissatisfaction or blockages in being able to actually share with another. Look at eighth house as being that house of like after marriage, and having Saturn there. It blocks the equal moral way of sharing resources with other financial, all kinds of assets. Um, I'd also like to look at this Saturn placement as being able to do the dirty work, and being kind of given that dirty work to do by people, whatever that might mean. Just like something where if you're in a room with a lot of people and then there's just like this really thing that this task that nobody wants to do, like Saturn in the eighth house would be like, I'll do it, I'll just get my hands dirty and I'll probably just do it. Because there's a little bit of that, not necessarily like curiosity, but maybe just a feeling of it has to be done, and just, yeah. And I look at the eighth house as also kind of being this house of entrepreneurship, businesses, and investing your money and making money via alternative means, which for me, like for sure, before my first Saturn return was definitely blocked. And I didn't even consider like running my own business or starting something just that was not that it wasn't like in my mind, but that it was taught by my dad, of course. It was the father principle because he worked for the government and he would have this view of business owners as being greedy and as being having unpredictable lifestyle and an unstable lifestyle. And so he would always teach me to not do that. Like don't invest your money in something if you don't know what the outcome is going to be, if you don't know what the return is going to be. Like, get a job like in the government, or like be a teacher or something where it's that, monthly salary is going to always ensure that you have
Mm,
stability. So that was definitely like a teaching there, from my father. Yeah.
interesting. Yeah, like stay in this traditional kind of lifestyle of this paycheck is promised. You'll get it as long as you go to work. Yeah.
Yeah. And in terms of also just like physical intimacy and um all those things associated with eighth house was something that I didn't even get from my dad. Obviously, it was not even like, I think it was hard for him as well to give that. Like, he'd be like, Tan, come and give me a hug. And his hugs would always be kind of not full, you know? It would just be like
Mm,
a light hug, because I think that, the way that he grew up and his family and background and stuff just was constricted in that way as well. And there was this like professional family dynamic, which can be observed with my grandfather and, my grandmother and him and stuff like that. So let's talk a little bit about Gene Key 38 and this very interesting gene key that people in my generation would also have, and um, how I see Saturn manifesting there with struggle being the shadow and perseverance being the gift and honor being the city of it. Um, so struggle, I think for Gene Key 38, I would interpret that as fighting for something that's not worth fighting for. Or fighting for something that you don't see the meaning or the purpose in it. Or sometimes, like the shadow of 38 is just feeling defeated in general, meaning you have nothing to fight for. You don't know why you're living. Your life has no purpose. It has no meaning. So that's like the various different ways that that can manifest. And for sure, like before my first Saturn return in my 20s, I had various different jobs. Like I changed my job like all the time because I didn't know what I liked and I didn't know why I would do something. Like I remember my first ever job was a news reporter on TV. And I remember the reason why I chose that job was because I didn't know what else I wanted to do. And I was like, oh, maybe it could be fun. So I went for like a short interview and they did a camera test. And then they wanted me. And I was like, oh, sure. Like there was just no sense of like, why am I doing this?
mm.
And then it didn't last, like a year into it, I quit. And then I did something else. And I also didn't know why I went into my next job and I quit. And that continued to be like this cycle. Almost like being defeated in life and having nothing to really fight for in a sense. And so yeah, like when you have found something to fight for with Gene Key 38, it instills that perseverance. You can do it for the rest of your life. You can do it until you die, but it has to be the right thing for you. It has to be something that happens almost easily for you, I feel, because there's always going to be obstacles, whatever path you choose. And if the path is already not the right path for you and you face obstacles, you definitely can't persevere. But if the path is right, whatever obstacle comes your way, like you would never um, give up. But also, I feel that this is another thing that my dad also taught me was to never give up. And of course, I'm not sure that he was always, persevering in the right thing, but he would never give up, whatever that was. Like he would just not give up. And so that was something that he always like at the beginning of earlier this year, before he passed away, he said to us, like, whatever you do, just don't give up. Like if you do it and you don't like it right away, just stick with it first. Just see how it's gonna be. Don't quit right away. And I feel like honor is when you are envisioning the outcome of your cause or your mission, and you know that it's not going to happen yet, but you uphold its power. Like if you're fighting for something like a mission and that's going to take years before you can see what reward's going to come from that fight, but you have to be able to honor the fact that it's going to get there, that you will get there, and that it will benefit like the people around you. So Do you have anything
Mm.
you want to add, Sarah? I feel like I talked a lot.
Oh, that's so great. You know, this one says channel of purpose. So everything that you just summed up there, yeah, it's like looking for that purpose. What is worth the struggle? And that gives me the purpose that I'm looking for.
Totally. Yeah. So, time for the fun part. We're going to do a little bit of a revision of our Saturn returns, exposing what actually happened
Yeah.
during
This
that
will be
time.
great. Nice.
Should I bring up the timeline?
Yeah, yeah. That would be I don't actually have the things, the branches of that tree to where anyone could see them, but I can kind of describe. I mainly have that timeline so people can see those that have Saturn and Aquarius, what
Yeah.
the dates are
Oh, I don't know if
of.
you wanted to touch on this.
Oh, I do actually. And it kind of links into what you were just saying about continuing to try. So what's interesting about you and I is that you're a 1-3 and I'm a 6-2. And for anybody that has a 6 line, there's 3 periods of life for us. So that first 30 years, we are performing like a 3, the third line. So we're also experimenting with that trial and error. And this is what I have such an appreciation for you for is with a 6-2, we get to 30 and we're like, I'm done with that. With that, you know, I it's so much work. And so then we hit this phase where we kind of go on the roof, as they say. So this is kind of the phase that I'm in right now. And for anybody that's a 6 line, this is
Can
going to
you hear that?
happen. What was that?
It's a car honking
Oh,
really loudly.
I did hear something.
Okay. Sorry.
No, it's okay. So for a 6 line, you go from 0 to 30, ages 0 to 30, and this will be that period of trial and error where you're performing like a third line. And then you hit this period of time for about 20 years where you go on the roof
Hmm.
and you are kind of just an observer of life and lives. I've found out I'm very interested in other people's biographies, their stories, mythology, fairy tales. All of that's very interesting to me instead of having to be the one to experience it, which is what that third line wants to do. The third line, you know, doesn't matter if I don't achieve it, I'm still enjoying life. And this is still really magical because things are, you know, coming from this. So I thought that was interesting that you embody the third line and I embody the sixth line that goes through that phase of being very interested in trial and error, but then hits that point where we're like, I'll just watch.
Interesting that
So
you brought this up. Yeah.
yeah, it seems to kind of correlate in time with the Saturn return for that first one at the very least.
Hmm.
So yeah, that's why I wanted to bring that in.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. Um, did you want to?
I was just showing where on the quantum mandala our
Mhm.
gene keys for these Saturn placements falls. And
Mm,
just, you know, just to kind of bring the human design, the gene keys and the astrology back together. I love these
right.
quantum mandalas. So we're, you know, both of our Saturns were in the root center. That's where those gates are. And that
Mm.
will, yeah, it'll get to that in a second. But also just as far as on the wheel, you know, this is where they fall.
Yeah, that's interesting. That both of it is in the root, which is like this pressure center, the pressure to have ambition. And that's, I guess, oh, I forgot to mention this as well. I think for the Saturn Capricorn and even Saturn Aquarius is ambition, but probably approaching ambition in a different way, just because of the style of Capricorn Aquarius, but that's definitely there. Yeah, that's in the roots. So your
Okay.
timeline, do you want to go through that
Timeline.
first? Or would you like me to go through mine first?
Go through yours first because it happened, we'll go
Yeah,
sequentially.
yeah,
Yeah.
you're right. Yeah. So I made this really like
Nice.
weird timeline, but Yeah, so Saturn in Capricorn happened from December 19, 2017 to March 21st, 2020. And so I put October 2017 as the first time that I knew what I wanted to fight for. And this was actually before the Saturn went to Capricorn, but I feel like there's always this leading up point to like what's coming. And this is when like I mentioned to you, like maybe a bit of a controversial story. So at that time, I was working as an English teacher and I was teaching in Singapore. And it was around October of that year was when I went vegan for the first time in my life. Um, and I went vegan cold turkey. So just like overnight, and I never ate meat or touched meat again from that point onwards. And the reason for that was that I went down this rabbit hole of looking into and studying the animal agriculture and slaughterhouses. So I went through looking at all those videos. And for an entire week, after a week of doing that, I lost my appetite. And I was like, I don't want to contribute to this. If I'm going to have some principles or if I want to fight for something in my life, this will be the first thing that I want to fight for is to not like to fight for the lives of the animals, the rights of these animals. Um, and that just hit me really strongly. And I think after I stopped eating meat, maybe it's a dietary biological thing, but maybe it's also a consciousness thing that from that point onwards, I felt like I was no longer afraid to look at the truth of things, even if it didn't happen right in front of me, that something could still be happening behind the scenes. And maybe that's like my son in the 12th house, like looking behind the scenes as well. But not be afraid to look behind the scenes and to really get down and dirty, like Saturn, the eighth house. And yeah, just to see the world for what it really is, even if it's not easily seen, even if it's hidden somewhere. It doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. So that was the first time in my life that I really felt strongly about something. I never felt strongly about anything before in my life until that point. And I think that kickstarted a series of events during the Saturn return. Like, for example, me questioning myself and actually asking myself the question of like 10 years from now or 20 years from now, do I still want to be teaching English? Is this how I see myself 10 years from now? Which is something that a lot of people probably ask themselves, but I never did. And because like I told you, like I was just defeated and had nothing to fight for. But when I really asked myself that question, I was like, no, I don't want to be doing this 10 years from now. So it really got me into a bit of like anxiety mode during those days because I didn't know what I wanted to do in my life. I didn't know where my life was going, but I know that I just couldn't continue my contract of teaching English anymore. And I'd been teaching English for 6 years. And it was the first job that I was taking on for quite a while, right? Because my the jobs I had earlier would just quit after a year or so. But this was like, oh, it's been 6 years of teaching English. But no, it wasn't what I wanted to be doing 10 years from now. I can't see myself in my own future doing this as a teacher. Not to say that this is about anybody else, but just for myself, of course. So, yeah, that's when leading up to August was when 2018 was when I made my first astrology video. It was also the first time. Well, it was also when I got engaged to my boyfriend at that time as well. Now we're getting to like eighth house stuff, but so he proposed to me. But the thing about my partner at that time was that we were dating for about 2 years, but for the whole of our relationship, it was long distance. And within 1 year, we probably met up like 2 or 3 times. And every time we met up, it was like for 1 or 2 weeks. So now that I look back on it, there were a lot of delusions and illusions. And I put those planets at the bottom to kind of illustrate the fact that my Saturn is sitting with Neptune and Uranus. And so there's that Neptune and Uranus mixing in there. But so yeah, so he proposed in August of 2018, and it was just a really not a great proposal. But I said yes. I was like, yeah, sure. And so yeah, we were engaged. And that's when I had, and then the next year. So moving on to like February of 2019. That's the time when Saturn was exact conjunct. February 2019, 0 degrees orb with my Saturn. So that's when I had this Saturn in the eighth house questioning of, is it worth sharing? Like, is it worth sharing my life with this person? Because he was living abroad. And I had to move there. That was the agreement. And I didn't even know, like, I just recently started my astrology channel, my astrology business. I moved back home and I was living with my mom and my sister in our house that we've had for a really long time. And it was just a really old house and it needed huge renovations. So I didn't have a career. I didn't have a place that I was living that was mine. I had some money saved up, but that was it. Like, I felt like I had nothing. And then I had nothing to share, first of all, but also this person was just not really worth sharing a life with. And and then I also evaluated like my past relationships in which I was in a relationship before this one, the one that I mentioned to you previously, that was abusive. And in that relationship, when it came to sharing of resources, you know, I realized that we were living together, but I paid for the rent, you know? And not only did I pay for the rent, but he had asked me to pay for, because he was studying his master's degree at that point. So he had asked me if I could help him pay for his master's studies because he didn't have money. And I was like, sure. So I was paying for his master's study, which I don't know why I did that. Like, I would never do that again. I was paying for the rent. So there wasn't this equal sharing. And I guess a part of me was just like realizing that this new person that I was engaged to is also not worth like sharing, you know? So I broke off the engagement and I felt really happy, like freedom, you know, like that. Like I get to live my own life now. I don't have to be binded to this person. Um, so yeah, but then after breaking off that engagement, I just went down a spiral of darkness because then not only did not I not have a job, not have a place to stay, I didn't have a relationship anymore. I was really alone. So I felt like I had lost so many things. So from March, March, April, May of 2019, um, I was living in my, my room in my old house that I lived in when I was in high school, making astrology videos and crying every day because I was just in so much fear of like I didn't know where this was going. But I kept fighting. I told myself, is it worth fighting for? And I was like, yeah, I think it is. I think that I'm meant to not work for a boss. I'm meant to be my own boss. Um, but I have to keep going. Like I can't just quit. So yeah, it was a really hard time. And I remember seeing a couple of astrologers just to have someone to talk to. And I saw a therapist so that they could help me out a little bit here and there. But I did a lot of my own like purging from past relationships, the one that I was previously in, but also the one that was abusive, just like staying in my own room and trying to do all the healing work there. So yeah, and I think um I'm gonna move this. I can't see the last part. Oh, February 2020. Oh yeah. So that was what happened there. And I met Aryan. Um well, I knew Aryan from like November of 2018, but we were just talking and there was nothing really, we just talking about astrology. But in May of 2019, Aryan traveled to Thailand, and that's when we met for the first time, like physically. So that was during that phase, that hard like Saturn return phase. And so Saturn went to retrograde, and then I had an exact Saturn return, Saturn conjunct again in October of 2019. And I think at that month I was in the Netherlands. I was traveling to see Aryan. But I remember I actually went to my old astrology videos and I made one video in October of 2019 talking about my astrology journey, and at the beginning of the video, my face was, like, all swollen, like I just cried or something, and then I don't know what happened. I can't remember exactly, but, like, I think emotionally and mentally, it was just a wreck for me that year, like 2019. 8th house rules, like, your mental health and a lot of things, and it was a complete wreck. But yeah, it was really hard those times, and then things got a little bit lighter because then Saturn started moving away, and I was like, "Oh, yes, my Saturn return the ending of my Saturn return is coming." And then February of 2020, when Saturn just about to leave Capricorn, um, I was that was when I think the sexual part of the Saturn in the 8th house kinda happened, and I decided to try something experimental with Aryan at that time, but I wasn't ready for it. So, I think after that, after trying that, it really messed with my insecurities, which if you have Saturn in the 8th house, I think there are a lot of insecurities there
Mm.
that you may not know and you may not be able to dig up until something really triggers it. But a lot of my insecurities got triggered to the point where um, I felt this urgency to seek a therapist again. I felt that in 2018 and then again in 2020. This urgency, like I need to see a therapist, otherwise I'm like in anxiety. So I saw my therapist and talked it through, and I got into tantra that year for the first time, to just to get the whole complete, like, sexual healing that I felt like I needed. Um, and yeah, it got better over time, but it took another year, I think, before I can kind of work through my insecurities and kinda came out of it.
Wow.
So, that's the story.
Beautiful. Wow. It's really interesting because there's a lot of correlations that I was like, "What?" Lots of,
Really, like, with
um
your story.
yeah, because, when you're saying it was just about to leave Capricorn, but then it dipped back in, I'm during that time having a lot of themes of 8th house matters once it dips back into Capricorn.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, it's really interesting how there's such a shift with the Saturn return. I mean, you said it, like, I didn't have anybody. You don't have the job that you had. You were living with your mom in this old house that you, like, grew up in, and it's just like the
Yeah.
whole world shifted. You ended a relationship. It's like it feels like you're in the middle of a tornado and everything's just swirling around you.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the way I ended that relationship, it's actually a very similar way that I ended my last relationship, was out of this, I don't know what it was, it's an urgency, it's like, I have to end it now because if I didn't, I would have to move there, and if I moved there, I had to live with this guy who just wanted to have kids. Like, it was
Mm.
just a really toxic relationship, I think, that we had, and he just wanted kids right from the beginning of the relationship, and I was like, "Yeah, I also want kids," and then I realized later on, I don't really want kids yet, but he really wanted it. He was a lot older than me. He was like, maybe 8 or 9 years older than me, so he really wanted kids. But I couldn't, and I knew that if I moved there, that was it. I had my flight tickets booked. It's like everything was planned. And so and I was like, "If I'm there, I'm dead." Yeah, I just can't take it
Yeah.
back, so I can't go? So it's that urgency. So, and yeah, like, and then you had nothing left after that, and you're just like, "Why did I do that?" But you had no other choice. Like, what else were you gonna do?
Yeah, and 8th house being, like, your value to other people, so in this situation, like, that was your value to this person, and it's not, yeah, aligned with exactly what you feel internally.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're absolutely right. I couldn't share a child with this person?
Yeah, yeah. There's so many interesting correlations. So yeah, I can definitely, dig into mine a little too, and, um, so
Should I
those
share
themes.
screen?
Yeah, maybe share from yours or I can share from mine either way. Yeah.
Is it the same? We can
So there's 2 of them. Yeah. So this one, um, so basically what happened when you were talking about, Saturn left Capricorn and dipped into Aquarius just 1 degree,
Mhm.
and then turned around and went back into Capricorn for a while. So for me, that was so Saturn first entered into Aquarius in March of 2020, which everybody knows what happened in March of 2020. The whole world shut down. So at first I was like, everybody experienced my Saturn return with me. That tension of Saturn versus Uranus, constriction versus freedom, was a huge part of my Saturn return. So basically, I was at the time living in Texas with my boyfriend of roughly like 9 years. He and I didn't like start out officially dating. We were friends, and then we got into a relationship, and it was, there was good times, there was bad times. It was very much a roller coaster, very high highs, very low lows, very abusive mentally, physically, psychologically, very constricting. I told him at times that he was stricter than my parents because he was, and just really domineering over my life and what I could do, who I could be friends with. This was a big thing for him.
Yeah,
Isolating me from
yeah.
family in this way of, you know, this was part to do with me too, the isolation from family. I just didn't feel like reaching out to them because I didn't want to tell them about my relationship, you know? So, and I'm trying not to be like too much of a, this is all about my relationship. That's all that happened. That's not all the Saturn return was, but it's just so interesting that you'll see the correlation here in a second. So I'm in this really long-term relationship with someone that's kind of alienating, doesn't really want me hanging out with other people. And he goes away for work into a different state. And during this time, I get really involved politically. I had always been really interested in geopolitics around the world, international affairs. And so we had a big election come up here in the States. And there was a lot of kind of alternative views, like, what can we do to circumvent this problem? And so basically, I found an online group that was focused around this podcast that we were all listening to. Long story short, I got really involved in the music part of this kind of movement, this political movement, and in the way of karaoke. So I started this campfire karaoke get together online, and people loved it. And so we continued to do that. It was a really small group, but it's technology based. So that's what I'm going to keep emphasizing. My friends,
Mm.
I started making more friends online. And basically, my ex at the time was again working away. And, I've skipped a little bit ahead. So, March 2020 was he was living at the house with me, but not working. I was working from home. I had a job that allowed me to work remotely. So, I was doing
Mhm.
medical coding.
Mm.
And so that was when Saturn entered into Aquarius, and then it left your birthday. It left in
That
2020,
is so
May
specific.
2020. It's so interesting. That's when it's stationed to go back into Capricorn. So May 2020, he's kind of got a job up in a different state, and right around then, I was going to go visit him for his birthday. So I should mention in March 2020. So my birthday is April. So in April 2020, we had done my birthday on the balcony of our apartment because we couldn't go anywhere. And it was at this point in our relationship that we had tried a lot of different things to make things work. And I was drinking wine that night, and I told him, I was like, I think we should start to separate. Like, we had always had this thing where we said, we're preparing each other for the next partner. Like, we were putting each other through hell basically so that we would make each other a good partner. I know. Like, this knowledge that I had, like, you know, I tell him all the time, I was like, don't ever question why I left you. I always said that to him, like towards the end. So anyway, March 2020, or April 2020, I was telling him like, I think we should split up. I think we should figure out. Okay. July 2020 rolls around. He's working out of um, a different state. I go up to see him, and I'm not even able to eat. I feel nauseous around him. I'm sick, physically sick around him. And so I left and I went home, and Then I went back again in August to see him, but this time it was different. This time I felt kind of powerful. And I don't know why, but
Mm.
I just felt like I was like, I'm independent already. I don't, I've had conversations with friends in political movement. And so I'm just feeling
Mm.
really empowered. And then um, I go home and I'm talking with people online, and he's now going to come visit back to Texas. And I'm telling my friends online, hey, if I'm not around for the next 2 weeks, it's because my boyfriend's visiting. And basically, I told one of the guys, I was like, yeah, he doesn't like it when I talk with other people, especially not guys. And this guy's like, that sounds like an abusive relationship. And I was like, no, no, it's not. He's just got standards and we're spending time together. And no, of course not. And then I started to realize actually, yeah, like me not being able to do what I want to do in my life is constricted. So here's my philosophy shifting. This is very ninth house. And so then this other guy is talking with me, and this other guy is interested in me. And I even tell this guy, I'm like, I'm in a relationship, I'm damaged goods. That's what I told this guy. I had been very honest with these new people in my life that I didn't know about all the things I had been through in my relationship. I told them kind of detailed information because I just felt free
Mm.
in this internet space. So this other guy convinces me that he wants to marry me. He also is abroad. Never met him in my life. 2 weeks, this guy has me convinced he wants to get married. He's proposed. We had marriage papers. Like we both were going to sign this. I had my dad going to talk to this guy
After
on the
two
phone.
weeks.
After 2 weeks. Oh yeah. But it was different. This one was different. Meanwhile, I mean, to my credit, like I'm leaving a 10-year relationship and I'm completely out of my mind. I had been gaslit for like 10 years. So, I have to be gentle with myself on how crazy I was. But yeah, I was totally convinced. I had never been proposed to. My boyfriend of 10 years didn't propose to me. This guy has just met me and he thinks that I'm wife material. So, like, yeah, I'm going to jump on board. So anyway, that ended in a blaze of glory. Like this guy just completely ghosts me. And that was when, so the ghosting happened when, or I should say this kind of relationship situation started when Saturn re-entered into Capricorn. So so your value to other people, those eighth house matters you were just talking about, those kind of revved up for me when Saturn went back into Capricorn into my eighth house. And so this whole kind of scheme of this 2 week relationship ends when Capricorn stations to go back direct at 25 degrees of Capricorn. That's when that all started to fall apart. So it's very interesting how that astrology kind of correlates exactly with kind of a really speedy relationship, but would have very likely ended up in a similar, um, what's the word? Codependent,
Mm.
narcissistic
Mm.
um, dynamic. I'm
Mm.
almost positive it would have ended up that way.
Mm.
So it's almost like Saturn sent me through the time warp of, here, let's play through that real quick. Here's the full fast forward. Do you want to be also still in, somebody else's constriction, somebody else
Wow.
holding back from what you really want out of life?
Yeah, I think that I'm fascinated by this because I feel there's that electricity, there's that lightning fast like epiphany or like download with the Aquarius that's like there for you there.
Yeah. So we zipped right through that one. And then, of course, I go into another mental kind of like meltdown, also seeing a therapist at this time. So I am now just kind of in the world. I'm like, okay, I'm alone. I don't have my I didn't mention this, but I did end up leaving my ex, or my boyfriend of 10 years
Yeah.
ish. I ended up leaving him to go get married to this guy who ends up ghosting me. I'm living in like situations where I'm trying to live with friends, and they're taking me in, they really want to help me. They really
So
want
that was around like the end of 2020th, would you say?
yeah, December 2020. So that's when
Okay.
we're moving into that December 17th, 2020. I'm
Mm.
living with a friend after a failed attempt to live with my sister. I'm just not able to get along with anybody. And I was self-centered because I had gone so long in a relationship where I wasn't able to focus on myself. So, my shadow is fighting a lot of other people's shadows at this point in life. And I'm just trying to get a friend group that I can trust, because those people that kind of helped me out of my relationship by making me recognize the abuse that I was going through deserted me. They just, like, I didn't exist. They dropped me. And I felt like a lone wolf. I felt like a scavenger. Like I was just going out looking for people. I was manic, and I was trying to rekindle relationships with friends that I had had before.
Mm.
And I felt like an oddball. I just remember that New Year's, I just did not belong. I didn't belong anywhere. I didn't belong in any friend groups that I was part of. And people were pushing me out, and I don't blame them because, like I said, I was pretty self-centered at the time. But yeah, so December is happening. And what's interesting is I switched my operating system at this point from we talked about this before, but
Yeah.
from Android and PC into iPhone and Mac, and I just all of a sudden abruptly, and it really does change the programming. The internet space also changes the programming of your brain space, just because
Okay.
whatever you're tuning into, whatever, click, like this, the functionality of Apple is so much different from that of PC.
Interesting.
So so my brain kind of felt completely rewired. I also looked back at kind of my YouTube history, and prior to the Saturn return ever starting, I was watching every morning this news program, a big block of it, and then followed by Crash Course, just science, anything. Just it was very orderly. My podcast viewing schedule, and afterward, funnily enough, I mean, you're one of the first astrologers that I saw. You and this other girl, Alyssa Sharp,
Oh
and
yeah.
I watched your boot camp, and of course, boot camp for a Saturn ruled. It's like, yes, let's do
I don't
it.
think I called it a boot camp though,
You
Sarah. I think
didn't.
it
I
was
think it
just a
was like
camp.
day camp or something. This was just me imagining. So
You wanted it to be a boot camp
I
though.
wanted it so badly to be a disciplined boot camp. So I got into the structure of learning about astrology in that way, and I just kind of got hooked. And that was in the midst of my Saturn return too. So yeah, that gets us to December 2020. Um, and I mean, also too, when I switched operating system, there was this new app called Clubhouse that came out in
Mhm.
January of, well, actually, I think it came out much earlier than that. But that introduced me to a lot of people too, and got me really interested in this kind of role model life, and kind of living an examined life, basically. I
Mm.
got really into cryptocurrency, trying to understand that and all that kind of stuff.
Mm.
So then we
Yeah.
move past that, and this is when it kind of gets direct onto my Saturn. So January 4th, 2020 to February 2020, the 21st was when, I think it's on, yeah, there it is. Okay. This is the when Saturn is within the orb of my particular
Yeah.
placement
Gate 41.
in gate 41. So basically, what happened here in this particular instance was I went for something called a wilderness first responder over in Washington State. And in that time, I did an interview with a podcast about the karaoke group that I had started. I had met on in person for the first time people that I had met online through the karaoke group. So this is more to do with like my groups, my the
Mm.
philosophy from
So
which
you
I
met them in
think.
person for the first time?
I met them in person for
Oh.
the first time, um, and and then I also got kicked out of the house that I was living in by the friend that I was living with. Basically, I pulled up and my car was blocked in by her car. I called, I knocked on the door, I finally used my key to get in. It was a whole meltdown session, and I had to leave that house. I move in with another friend who's very, very great. Like she's really helpful, but she was a friend of my friends, and my friends were upset when I drank the last coffee in the house. So that resulted in another meltdown. I mean, it seemed like the most simple things were were just huge aggressors in this part
Right.
of my cycle. So,
I have a question. You said
yeah,
that when you were in the abusive relationship, you had friends who were sort of telling you that it was abusive, like helping you get out of it, but then they deserted you, right?
yeah,
So were those like did you have like a physical relationship? Like a was it online or was it like in person? It
online.
was also online.
Online, those were people I had, yeah, so those were people that I had met online. And then those people deserted me. But then I'm also having this happen in the physical realm. A lot of, relationships just, there's so many times in this time of my life where I was just like, really? Why? Like I just didn't feel like I deserved it. It felt so unwarranted the way that I
Mm,
was being mistreated in my mind.
mm,
There were friends that I had maintained friendships with, um, in the physical realm, people that I had known during my relationship, the 10-year relationship. And there were people that I had met online that I continued to be friends with through this whole debacle too. So
mm,
it was really discerning. Who are the
mm,
real friends?
mhm,
Who are the
mhm,
people that are going to love me unconditionally?
mhm.
And who are the people that are just, either also lonely, there's shadows there too, whatever it was that was connecting us wasn't genuine. It wasn't unconditional.
Right. Yeah, I like that because I think there's a particular Aquarius degrees or gene key that has the gift of discernment. So at some point
Mm.
Saturn would have been there as gene key 13 and like kind of taught you the lesson of discernment there as well.
Yeah,
Mm,
I like to say during readings that with Saturn and Aquarius, Aquarius defines itself by what it is not. And also, Saturn is associated with feigned appearances, which is false appearances, knowing being able to discern what's real versus what's not with that boundary. So,
mm, right.
yeah.
So how come you wrote influencer plans here?
So, it was basically like when Clubhouse happened, I had this
Oh,
idea.
okay.
And for me, with the sixth line being my conscious side, it's what I am aware of myself is that, yeah, there's some kind of like role model position that I want to take on that
Mm,
I feel
mm,
called to.
mm,
But with that two line being my unconscious, I wasn't aware of what that thing is that draws people
mm,
in, what gift
mm.
it is.
Right.
So then we're kind of in
Anything
this
else?
year.
Okay.
So May 2021, well, actually, we're in 2022. So May 2021, this was when Saturn stationed to go back through Aquarius a few degrees. So it got to the 13th degree of Aquarius and then turned around to go into retrograde again. Um, and so for May 2021, this was when I officially left my corporate job. I had been
Oh.
trying so hard to stay in this job, and I was like in tears trying to sit on a computer and mindlessly, work through the matrix. It was just awful for me.
Mm,
My grandpa would come knock on my door and would ask me to do things that he needed done because he just could not understand that I was working. And I just didn't want to be working. The job that I had was doing medical coding for patients that are going through dialysis. So it was really, I mean, reading through their ailments, all the conditions that they had, and just that lifestyle is so hard. And I couldn't do anything physically for these people. And so it was just kind of endlessly reading about people's trauma and not being able to process that anywhere, not even recognizing I was taking that on or energetically.
mm,
And so I began taking a lot of online courses at this time too. I took philosophy with Decaf Quest. I took becoming a live player with Rebel Wisdom, Gene Keys. I invested in Richard Rudd's Pearl Sequence. And I was just taking a lot and consuming a lot of online knowledge. I actually began belly dancing classes around this time too.
oh, so
So,
did I.
did you
I was
really?
also not around this time, but during
So
my
funny.
Saturn return.
Yeah, I guess it's just one of those callings.
Maybe for different reasons. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, well, um, And then, like I said, I got really into cryptocurrency around this time. But mainly, kind of the big thing was I was like, I don't care where I'm going. I'm just not going up a corporate ladder. I don't want to do
Mm.
that life. I don't want to live a
So
nine to
you quit that
five.
job without having a plan ahead. You just
My
did it.
plan was I was going to work for my dad for a little while and then start traveling. That was kind
Mm.
of the yeah, the I didn't plan it very far out. I was just like, I'm done with this. Working for family has a lot more meaning to it.
Mhm.
Even I was just helping out around the house with grandparents and doing dishes and things like that.
Mhm.
Life had more meaning. I was more in the moment as opposed to corporate lifestyle, which is thank God it's Friday and just like really fake. Just so
Yeah.
all the things about corporate lifestyle make me cringe now to even think. My life has so much more meaning now that I work for my dad. I live with my grandparents. My family is a big part of my life. And that extends out to friends too. My friends are more genuine. I enjoy conversations. Working with you is amazing because we start out with embodiment, deep breath work, and that you can do that in Silicon Valley maybe, but it's just not that's not the same as what I live now, the lifestyle that I have. So very ninth house in that way too.
Mm. Mm.
So then after May of 2021, I we get to October 2021 where well, I should say in May, I guess before October 2021, Saturn goes back over gene key 41 or gate 41. So this was September 2021 to November 2021. This was when I had that failed attempt of trying to go overseas to do the Greening the Desert project. It was nuts. And I was really depressed after that. I had to take like a week off work because I didn't get to do the thing that with that Greening the Desert project, I was going to come back with a certification in permaculture design. And I really
Mm.
wanted to like plan gardens and things like that. That was the expectation was that I would have a certification. And so that was kind of the big thing that happened during that time. I started taking
Seems like you
Arabic
were learning and studying a lot of things,
a
and,
lot.
yeah.
Everywhere, all kinds of things. So I didn't mention that I'd taken there's this YouTuber called Maha, and she has partnered with this other person called Agata, and they were doing Arabic classes. So I revitalized my Arabic studies to try to, know a little bit before I went to Jordan.
Mm.
I signed up for my first astrology course, like that I actually paid for with Nightlight Astrology.
Mm.
um, and yeah, it was just a really interesting time of kind of analyzing history through the lens of biology and through the lens of astrology. So that's kind of where we're still drudging through. um because yeah, then it gets into June 2022. But
And how's
um
your life now? How are you feeling
oh
about
my
your
gosh,
Saturn return now?
well, the thing is, like, I don't just have Saturn there. I have my moon and my midheaven there. So there does seem to be this still slow build, which I really love now. It's so you were talking about tantra, and that's that's like such a good analogy for how I feel about life. It's just like take it little by little, live every moment, and you don't have to plan it all out. You don't have to have the master plan. Things will come to you, and yeah, I'm still in the midst of it. And you said before we started this interview thing that if somebody had asked you in the midst of it, how would you feel about it? And yeah,
Yeah.
I still feel like I'm in the middle of it. And I
Mm.
think you can tell by the way that I talk about it. It's all scrambled. There's so much that I can cover about what's happened in my life, but it's been amazing to have that huge change and to watch this kind of flower open up
Yeah.
instead of
Yeah, I
knowing
wonder
everything.
if you had sort of a, re-evaluating who you consider like your guru, if there is any, or what is your feeling or approach to that? Because the ninth house is sometimes considered as house of teachers and gurus and things like that. And I know that you're taking classes um, with astrologers and things. So I feel like maybe there's a shift there in who you want to learn from
Mhm.
and what kind of teachings you want to take on.
Absolutely, because, there was a time when I was so embedded in this idea of you need to be peer reviewed, you have to be tenured professor before people will start listening to you. This has to be, checked and checked and checked. And I had this epiphany moment kind of around that last date that I was mentioning, October 2021, where I realized that the way that I spoke with people was in experiment titles. It was basically like there was this experiment where they did this thing. I had never repeated the experiment and I didn't know anybody that had really done it. And it was just in the literature. If you go to the literature, it's there. And so I think the whole world has kind of had this question now of who do we trust? How can we trust? Where can we put our trust? And so that was certainly one of the big lessons of this for me, this whole Saturn return is, you know, intuition is kind of the only thing that you can trust. And where do you build that from is the real
Oh yeah.
question.
Yeah, the ninth house is the house that does rule your intuition. It's the higher mind. And I think the higher mind has a lot to do with intuition as well, versus
Yeah.
the third house, which is the logical mind and the well, not the intuition in many ways.
Right. So this is why I'm so interested in meditation. There's a discipline to it that it's still Saturnian, it's still practice, but it's
Mm,
practicing space, putting
mm,
space in between things and allowing things to come to you. So it's really structured still, but not in this way where you've got to, pull logical information from textbooks or from essays. It's innately within us, it's embedded in our DNA. So we just have to
right.
look inside.
Yeah. Yeah, and I wanted to talk a little bit like at the beginning of your story, you talked about how you were exposed to certain philosophies that made you see your relationship with your abusive ex differently and gave you the empowerment there. And I was just thinking like interesting how that's your empowerment. And I felt like with my Saturn in the eighth house, me having my own way of making money in the way that I wanted to make it, that eighth house, like being an entrepreneur or having your own business, that was my source of empowerment. Like I don't know if you've seen this series on Netflix. It's called Girl Boss. Like that. But like I was really inspired by her story of being the girl boss and I would watch it and be like every day, every morning I'd be like, I'm a girl boss, I'm a girl boss. And that gave me that empowerment to kind of, get through. Yeah. That's
That's really
interesting.
I like that that was your mantra and that is so like associated with 8th house. And for me, I look at the transits daily and I started writing affirmations and one of the ones that I write down every day is I am divinely guided, which is so 9th house. Yeah.
Oh wow. I
Yeah.
like that. Yeah. Yeah, like your guru is just the divine. Divine is guiding
What is
you.
it?
Oh.
Yeah, we're all wondering.
Yeah, and I found it like so interesting because with it being in Gene Key 41 and they say that Gene Key 41 can get in touch or tap into the future and like the leaders of the future and the leaders of the past. And I wondered if it's in your ninth house, if you had that ability to touch or tap into the teachers or the gurus of the future and what that would be like versus like the past. But
Yeah,
yeah.
well, with Jupiter and Aries opposite Mercury right now, I would love to say that, but we'll just say that that's how it manifests because we were talking about the placements right now, or was it? Uh, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
the astrology for this conversation is really beautiful for all the archetypes that we've presented today. I think.
Mm. And do you have any last messages or anything that you want to share with the audience? With maybe they have Saturn in the ninth house or going through Saturn return.
Yeah, with Saturn in the ninth house, or um, I could just like go with the flow. You know, it's it's
Oh, I
fighting
think
against life and, struggling. Uh-oh. Is it
your
okay now?
internet.
Ugh. Okay. I think
It's
that's
better
good then.
now.
I think that's okay. Okay. Well, maybe the universe is telling us no. Um, yeah, I think just go with the flow is, I there's no way to encapsulate what you're going to go through or what you already experienced until you have that awareness of observation. Like look at your own life and that's so brilliant to be able to understand archetypes. If you can look at your own particular situation, you can start to see how those archetypes arise. And I think that's the beauty of astrology and all of these philosophies, is to see the divine in everything.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. It's like the ninth house is known to be the house that rules religion. But when you said the divine and everything, that's just a really Aquarian way of approaching the ninth house as well, is
Yeah.
the divine is everywhere or God is within you, that kind of approach. Yeah, I wanted to say as well that, when it comes to having Saturn in the eighth house and sharing everything, with another, like sometimes we feel like we have to struggle through that. So for example, if you have more money than your partner, right? You may feel like you have to put in more and maybe your partner's, sharing less and maybe you feel like it's not right for you or you don't have to struggle through that. I think if you allow, if you have this placement and you allow yourself to change course or to say no and know what your boundaries are when it comes to sharing those resources, that it can be easy, that it is possible, like at some point in your life to have that sharing with another just be so easy, especially if it's like in Capricorn and it's in Jinky 30 and you think that you have to struggle. Um, the way that I was struggling and giving away all my money to my ex, it was like, what are you doing, Tad? And now it's like Arya's got a lot of money. It's so easy now. It doesn't have to be so hard, It can be
Yeah.
easy. Um, yeah, go for the easy path, you know?
Totally. Yeah. It works with ninth house too. Go for the easy path of, you know, whatever path is laid out is beautiful. It's so amazing. And you don't have to force things into place. You don't have to have the full life story written out. In fact, it's much more interesting when you experience things and you can, see beauty in that, see the divine in that.
Yeah, yeah. That's super powerful with, the pressures that maybe some of the audience who are like in their 20s feel this pressure to need like to have a plan or to have to stick with something and not allow themselves to change. I think that's super important that you brought that up as well.
Mhm. Totally.
Yeah. So, thank you, Sarah, for today. So, if you guys out there are watching this video and you are going through your Saturn return or are going to go through your Saturn return or what is your relationship with Saturn, just comment below and share with us your experiences with that. We'd love to read them. And yeah, if you are interested in getting to know Sarah a little bit more, you can, of course, visit her website and your Instagram and TikTok as well. I'll provide a link to her contact in the description box below. And yeah, so that's it for today. Bye,
Thanks,
beautiful
Tan.
souls.